Hey guys, I'm Mnar Muhawesh and welcome back to another episode of MintPress News' Behind the Headline. I wanted to remind you that our drive to sustain this show is ongoing, and we want to already thank the nearly 100 citizen sponsors who've already become members. Now, Behind the Headline is also made possible by conscious businesses like Mystic Man Beard Oil, organic and sustainable personal care inspired by the power and positive influence of the great mystics of history. Now, there's still time to become a member of this show by visiting our website at mintpressnews.com/donations. Now, let's get behind the headline. Shortly after Amelia Nunez was born in December, the newborn started having seizures, as many as 15 a day. Now, knowing the medicine she was being prescribed by doctors at Children's Hospital Colorado could seriously damage her liver, Amelia's parents requested that she be treated with Charlotte's Web CBD oil by the hospital. And within days, her parents reported that not only was Amelia more alert and responsive, but her seizures had decreased dramatically. Amelia is now the youngest patient in an ongoing clinical trial to study the reactions of patients with severe epilepsy to CBD oil and identify any long-term side effects. In a statement, Children's Hospital made it clear, though, that it does not provide the artisanal marijuana parents may choose to administer to children in the study. The hospital added that we don't yet have the science to fully understand medical marijuana and how it impacts children, which is why Children's Colorado supports research to determine the safety and efficacy of medical marijuana. But here's the deal. So far, there have been numerous promising studies revealing the positive impacts of CBD or cannabidiol in treating epilepsy in children, multiple sclerosis, and even cancer. It's also been proven effective in fighting nausea, inflammation, and even depression. The cannabis-derived compound does not contain the psychoactive compounds found in THC, the part of the plant that gets you high. So it's been a major game changer in the fight for expanding access to medical marijuana. But as lawmakers attempt to push reefer madness into yet another century, despite shifting popular attitudes toward marijuana, CBD presents all the medical benefits and none of the supposed social threats. Still, as of July, only 16 states had CBD-specific laws on the books, not including the 23 states and Washington, D.C., which have legalized cannabis for recreational or medical use. And even in those 16 states, the laws are not created equally. Some, like Colorado, do an outstanding service of expanding access to families looking to make their own informed treatment decisions, while others remain incredibly narrow and limit access to a small number of patients, often only in clinical trials and only in cases of epilepsy. Now, it's important to note that on the federal level, cannabis in any form still remains a Scheduled I drug, alongside cocaine and heroin. And while CBD can be derived from industrial hemp, American farmers are still not allowed to cultivate that particular crop. Now, MintPress News reported in December about cannabis refugees, people who have left their homes in states with restrictive marijuana laws and headed to states with cannabis-friendly policies. We met with Aubrey Hill and her mom, Vicky, who had recently moved to California from Alabama in search of effective cannabis therapies. Aubrey, who is now 20, began experiencing regular, extremely painful seizures at the age of 5, and her doctors had recommended brain surgeries after standard treatments had failed. But not only did 2 of these surgeries fail to ease her seizure disorder, they also left her partially blind and led to losses of memory and cognitive functions. So like many others, Aubrey started self-medicating with cannabis. Alabama's restrictive Carley's Law allows board-certified neurologists at the University of Alabama at Birmingham to provide CBD oil to patients with debilitating or life-threatening seizures as part of a clinical study. But patients only started receiving those experimental treatments last year in April. Now, rather than navigating the new system, the Hills moved to Northern California in August, and Aubrey immediately started a CBD oil treatment regimen that's resulted in a dramatic decrease in seizure activity. Her mom told MintPress News, "I tried to do everything I could while in Alabama, but now that we were here in California, it's much better and we have a support system. You can ask questions in Alabama." They are unable to share the research. But just think, if CBD had been legal and accessible, Aubrey could have avoided years of painful seizures and ineffective treatments. While many parents and physicians have reported positive effects in CBD oil therapies, it remains to be seen what the long-term effects might be. But considering cognitive and behavioral issues, liver damage, and impediments to the body's ability to fight infection or to stop bleeding are known side effects of traditional therapies to fight seizures and epilepsy, perhaps the greatest thing that CBD oil can offer patients is hope through healing. Now, the nation's own draconian drug laws are at least partly to blame for the lack of research in this regard. The federal government has conceded that CBD and THC may have some medical value, but only as a separate single molecule. That's why the whole plant remains classed as a dangerous Schedule I drug. Even in that concession, though, it's clear that patients don't come first. Studies have shown synthesized single-molecule CBD to be less effective than whole plant CBD. And experts believe that CBD and THC are more effective when used together. The only winner in the federal government's scheduling scheme is Big Pharma, of course, which stands to reap massive profits if single-molecule treatments like CBD can be synthesized and mass-produced. Late last year, the DEA eased some restrictions to allow for more FDA-approved clinical trials with CBD. But hopefully for patients like baby Amelia Nunez, who have found relief in CBD, this will become a trend and not an exception to the rule. Have you ever thought what a world without war would look like? Well, it certainly wouldn't resemble the world we live in today. Sometimes we declare war against social ills or injustice that needs defeating, like poverty. But more often than not, our wars end up doing more harm than good. We've got war in Iraq, Afghanistan, Libya, Somalia, Sudan, and Syria, just to name a few. A new Cold War is brewing with Russia, and we're waging economic and cyber war with China. And when something is defined as a war, violence is often touted as the only solution. But if George Orwell's 1984 taught us anything, war, no matter which war that is not meant to be won. It's meant to be continuous. The principal enemy of the state conspiring against Big Brother writes, "A hierarchical society is only possible on the basis of poverty and ignorance. The war is waged by the ruling group against its own subjects, and its object is not the victory over either Eurasia or East Asia, but to keep the very structure of society intact." While it comes from a work of fiction, this statement couldn't be more accurate in describing the United States' addiction to war. America has been engaged in acts of war for 223 out of the 246 years of its existence. That's 93% of the time, with just 21 years of peace. This endless cycle of war has helped to create the largest empire the world has ever known, a dubious distinction if there ever was one. Now listen to this. The U.S. military budget for fiscal year 2015 was $615 billion. For an idea of scale, consider this. The military budget was $9 billion more than 2014. That's still 3 times that of China's and 6 times more than Russia's military budget. And our nation, which has 1,000 military bases or more dotting the globe, is deploying more and more special operation troops to assist foreign militaries with known records of human rights abuses, more often than not without congressional approval. But how have we become a nation built and sustained by war? Here to explain how war has become embedded in the American psyche and folded into our everyday fabric is David Swanson, author of War is a Lie and renowned peace activist. Check it out.
Well, I think the founding fathers of the U.S. government were a mixed bag, some more opposed to war than others, but I think they got at least some things very much right in the Constitution. For one thing, they were very intent and explicit about giving the power to make war to the Congress, to a body of representatives, rather than a single individual, rather than a president who they expected would wage war after war after war. They were very clear about this in their discussions. They also were writing in a very different time where the military-industrial complex was not what it has become, and they wrote the Constitution with the expectation that the United States would have minimal, if any, standing army on a permanent basis, and they gave the Congress the power to raise an army for a period of 2 years if needed for a war, and so forth. We now, of course, have a military that is permanent and standing in 175 nations, and I think they would at least be amazed to see such a thing. But the revolution, was advocated for here in Virginia and elsewhere in order, among other things, to allow U.S. expansion west, to seize territory and lives from the Native Americans. And so the Constitution and the creation of the United States was very bad news for the natives of this continent, who were going to continue to die in an ongoing genocide from that point forward. And in fact, the United States has been at war most of its existence from day one. And changing that is going to require changing our society more fundamentally than just amending the Constitution or abiding by it.
Right. And now the second edition of your 2010 book, War is a Lie, comes out in March. What has happened in the past 6 years that has prompted this second edition?
Well, war after war after war, more military spending than ever before by the United States under President Barack Obama, the dramatic expansion and continuation of a war in Afghanistan, for which the president recycled some of the lies from Iraq about the surge and the success in Iraq. Meanwhile, back in Iraq again and Syria, we have seen wars with no congressional input whatsoever. President Obama telling Congress at the last State of the Union that he would wage war in Syria and Iraq with or without them, and they're cheering for that and funding it. The war in Libya, intentionally waged without any input from Congress. And we have seen some developments, good and bad, in terms of public understanding of militarism and the desirability of wars and the lies about wars. So when in 2013, President Obama and the White House said we must have missile strikes in Syria that were in fact going to be a massive bombing campaign of Syria, and you must do this or support poisoning children with chemical weapons. I mean, this was a really hard sell, but the people of the United States said no. And that public resistance here and abroad was a big factor in stopping that. But the arming and training of militants in Syria that was even less popular continued and escalated. We did see last year resistance to destroying the nuclear agreement with Iran on the part of warmongers in Congress who preferred war to a nuclear agreement with Iran. And that was a defeat also of the Israel lobby, which was incredible and unprecedented. So there are reasons to be confident about the progress of the public's understanding of war lies, and there are reasons still to be deeply concerned.
Well, I'm really glad you mentioned that. I mean, what does it mean to say war is a lie? I mean, how do our current legislative processes protect this lie and allow it to continue?
Well, it does not mean war doesn't exist. It means that everything we're told that justifies war is a lie. Everything that explains a war as beneficial to its victims or necessary or inevitable is a lie. Everything told to keep a war going as if it's in support of the troops somehow and to escalate it and to make it look better after the fact is a lie. The lies that we're told about how wars were necessary as last resorts have to be exposed. There was a study this past year that found that when you ask Americans about a war and tell them there are alternatives, they are much less supportive. But when you tell them there are no alternatives or you don't say a word, they are quite supportive. And that suggests that people are assuming that the U.S. government has tried everything else. So it's important to point out to people that it has never tried everything else, that it has gone out of its way to avoid opportunities for peace in Syria, in Iraq, in Afghanistan, and everywhere else that it has chosen to wage wars, including drone wars, which are another new development in the past half decade.
And David, you talk a lot about ending war, but what exactly does a world without war look like? I mean, is it really possible?
Well, it's certainly possible. I'm not predicting it one way or another. A world destroyed by nuclear holocaust is increasingly likely, which is part of why we must move away from war. We also must move away from war because we need those trillions of dollars to be put into other measures to protect us from other dangers we've created, including climate chaos and environmental destruction. If we had the resources that are being dumped into preparations for war, about $1 trillion by the United States alone every year, we could work wonders in terms of giving the United States everything that Michael Moore says it should have in his movie about the good things in Europe. We could give foreign nations actual aid, not military aid, many times what they are given now, and make the United States loved and appreciated rather than hated and feared. We could invest in green energy on a scale that its advocates don't dare dream of if we moved away from war. And we would have conflict still, and those conflicts would have to be settled nonviolently, using the rule of law, using diplomacy, using boycotts, divestment, and sanctions. But we do not need to have war. It is not the norm. It has been the exception through human history and even more so human prehistory. We can choose to get rid of it, and we're going to have to soon, or as the saying goes, it may very well get rid of us.
Well, thank you so much, David, for joining us today, author of War is a Lie. Hopefully we'll talk to you again soon. Thank you.
Thank you.
Since President George W. Bush launched the global war on terror, the post-9/11 era has been characterized by a general climate of fear and anger toward Muslims here at home and abroad. The civilization of jihad narrative and biased media coverage played up this fear and hostility to justify military actions abroad as a fight against a threatening religion. But this manufactured anxiety was merely a distraction from the true impetus for any conflict: control over resources in the Middle East and Africa. Smokescreen or not, though, for the past 15 years, these emotions have manifested themselves in institutional policies that view American Muslims as a threat, and they are treated as suspect when doing just about anything. Muslims have been positioned as the boogeyman of our time, and as an industry, Islamophobia is worth upwards of hundreds of millions of dollars. And of course, the politicians who profit from war have jumped on this bandwagon to grab their share of the pie. Even our would-be leaders fan the flames of Islamophobia to court voters. Donald Trump, in particular, has built a campaign around constitutional flouting promises to protect Christianity, monitor mosques throughout the country, and close the borders to Muslims from around the world. Now, last year in particular saw a marked increase in anti-Muslim bigotry and hate crimes in the wake of the ISIS attacks in Paris and the San Bernardino shootings. Women and girls in hijabs were targeted for attack, mosques were firebombed and threatened with bombs, and armed protests were held outside of mosques aimed at impeding Muslim Americans' constitutional right to freely worship. All in all, 2015 was the worst year for anti-Muslim bigotry and hate crimes since 9/11. In the wake of the alarming rise in hate being spewed by the neocons of the far right and the far left's new atheist movement, it's important to remember that this country, though, was founded on the premise that all men are created equal. But how has that premise fallen by the wayside in the wake of trends of Islamophobia? Here to answer that question and talk about the dangerous attacks on American Muslims' First Amendment and constitutional rights is Isa Hodge, a member of the American Muslims for Liberty and a defender of the Constitution for all Americans and host of the super funny political comedy radio show, A Muslim and a Catholic Wake Up in Merica. Take a look.
The Founding Fathers wrote the Declaration of Independence, and we all know that it says that we hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator. And I think that that second part of the sentence there is something that a lot of Americans, either fail to or purposely ignore, or they just don't know. The sentence there says their creator. So that means if your creator and you is a rock, then that rock has given you, the right to be created equal. But unfortunately, if we look back in the history of the United States, there's a vicious cycle. And this is done purposefully in order to cause separation, the divide and conquer tactic. And that is to create an enemy. Whether it's an actual enemy or a fictitious enemy. Maybe go back to the Native Americans and with the pilgrims that came here through the founding fathers, even up to this day, still Native Americans are still being ostracized. The African slave, the Irish slaves. Fast forward to the Chinese during the time that they were building the railroads. Catholics in the late 1700s, early 1800s, Japanese during World War II. So there's always an enemy. The problem is that Muslims today are just the new enemy.
Right, and I'm really glad you talked about that. So tell me, what do the U.S. Constitution, our founding fathers, and the teachings of the Prophet Muhammad have in common?
Well, it's the Prophet Muhammad, peace and blessings of God be upon him, and the American founding fathers actually shared many common characteristics and beliefs. This can be seen in historical documents by comparing speeches and texts that they both left behind. And we learn similar viewpoints that Muhammad and the founding fathers held an issue pertaining to equal rights and religious liberties. So like for Prophet Muhammad and the for example, received revelations from God who directed him to celebrate diversity and cherish it as a staple of Muslim society. Muhammad's encounter with God would later be recorded in the Quran to state, "O mankind, we created you from male and female and made you into tribes and nations so that you may get to know one another." And then furthermore, in his last speech, Muhammad was quoted to say, "An Arab has no superiority over a non-Arab, nor a non-Arab has any superiority over an Arab. A white person has no superiority over a black, nor does a black over a white, only except in piety and good action." Now, in contrast, when we look at the American founders, they had a similar apathy to determining a person's societal worth based on ethnic and heritage. In 1776, several American founding fathers, of course, gathered in Philadelphia to write the Declaration of Independence. The American Constitution was then ratified in 1787. And the founding fathers also put into practice that Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof.
Right, and you've obviously dedicated your life to protecting the Constitution. Tell me, why is it so important to defend the Constitution, which was written over 200 years ago?
You have to be a realist and understand that during the time of the founding fathers, slavery was permissible. Slavery wasn't just African slaves, they were Irish slaves as well, as history will tell you. So there was a caste system, the landowners, and then basically everybody else. And so it kind of makes you wonder, did the founding fathers actually foresee a future where slavery was no longer permissible, where men could actually be created equal? If we look at William Lancaster, he was quoted to say, "But let us remember that we form a government for millions, not yet in existence. I have not the art of divination in the course of 400 or 500 years. I do not know how it will work. This is most certain that Catholics may occupy that chair and Muslims may take it. I see nothing against it." He further says that Lancaster asserted that these future fears of a certain Catholic or Muslim president, this was in July 30th, 1788, as part of a day-long debate on the Constitution Article 6, Section 3, that no religious test shall ever be required as a qualification to any office or public trust under the United States. So when I read these and others from John Hamilton and as well as Ben Franklin and George Washington, when I read these, I actually like to think that the founding fathers foresaw a future where all races and all religions would be merged in this melting pot of America.
Right, and our leaders often tout this country as a Christian nation, especially in the process of carrying out a supposedly moral duty that tramples on the constitutional rights of others, like in the case of Pamela Geller, Donald Trump, Michelle Bachmann, to name a few. How have you used interfaith dialogue, politics, and humor to fight that bigotry from the extreme right, and also work to expose their real agenda of divide and conquer?
Well, first thing I would like to address is this Christian nation ideology. I mean, there is in the First Amendment, an establishment clause that prohibits any religion from laying claim, and it is further proven through legislation the founding fathers did. This is clearly not a Christian nation, though it was founded by agnostic Christians themselves, but even they had issues with the Christian faith itself because of the persecutions that they received in England. This is basically a history lesson here. The problem is that we have what we call a cycle of violence in this country, where there is something that corporations or politicians want from another country, or even within our own country for that matter. But there is something that we want from somebody, so we have to create an enemy for that. And what happens is in these three phases of the cycle of violence is you have this propaganda and this rhetoric that is spilled out through there. For the Native Americans is that they were heathens, they were pagans. And this was done with Africans, this was done with the Black American, this was done with the Chinese, the Japanese, and the internment camps in 1942. This is also being done now. But the problem is that this rhetoric continues into phase two, which is isolated incidences of violence towards that minority that has been villainized or demonized. But the third and final stage, and if we really study American history, we actually see that this third and final stage is the most dangerous. And we have repeated this numerous times, where it becomes socially acceptable to cause harm and violence, and even laws are created permitting it or allowing it against that minority. So when you have profiteers like Pam Geller and Robert Spencer, and then Trump, of course, jumping on this, even Gary Johnson, who's running for the nomination for the Libertarian Party, he's even jumped on this bandwagon of look at the enemy. But people need to remember one thing. This has absolutely nothing to do with clash of religions or class of societies. If you follow the money, you'll actually see who the true enemy is. And it's not Muslims. I use humor a lot within my own show. I have a Muslim and a Catholic Wake Up in Merica. We're on every Tuesday night on our own website, as well as we're simulcasted through a few other affiliates. And we use a lot of humor to talk about it. And I think that humor is probably one of the better ways to break down those barriers. I think if we all stuck to the Constitution, we all followed the Constitution, and we took the examples of great men from the past, and I think that we would find our country in a lot better position than where we're at right now.
Well, thank you so much, Isa Hodge, for joining me today, host of A Catholic and a Muslim Wake Up in Merica. We'll talk to you again soon. Thank you.
Anytime. Thank you for having me.
Well, that's a wrap for today's episode. I'll continue to go behind the headline on social media, and you can join me in that conversation on my Twitter page at Mnar Muhawesh. We'll see you next week.